Yeah, did you have fun, Arwen? That was a really fun children's story, Laura.
Thank you.
I love the sound effects. That just made that so much more enjoyable. I think that, oh, and there's Arwen. You can always tell where my kids are, I'm telling you. Oh, man. We should, I like the sound effects, really thought about this ahead of time. Laura picked out her sound effects and, whatever went along. That's me. I think I'm doing the bump, bump, bump. She picked out whatever sound effects went with her story. I just should have slipped a few random ones in there, I feel like. She wanted sheep and she got, a horse, Jerry. All right. Anywho, Emily, fantastic. I don't know what my mic is doing now, but hey, whatever. All right. That was a fantastic song, Emily. Oh, my goodness. I don't think I've ever heard that before. That was awesome. That was just awesome. Man, I love that song so much. Oh, so I don't know how you follow the children's story. I think the sermon is just when the child gets to tell a story. And have some fun with it. We're on a series about Sabbath, in case you forgot from, if you haven't been here in like 8 weeks. It's been about the same the whole time. And we're calling this the Sabbath. Oh, that's not it. But we're calling this the Sabbath. This is actually part 6. And this one is called the Sabbath Party. And the reason why that is called the party, the Sabbath Party, it will be apparent very, 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 very soon, because I want to push back on a notion of the Sabbath that is very, 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 very popular. And I think that's really an important thing, because one of the things that confuses people about the Sabbath the most is that when they read the Old Testament, there's so many Sabbaths to choose from. Right? I mean, you've got, all of these special Sabbaths that happen throughout the Hebrew calendar. You have other kinds of Sabbaths. Well, there's of course, there's the weekly Sabbath. Oh, about that one. There's the weekly Sabbath. We have that Sabbath. Then we have the Sabbaths. Oh, here we go. Festival Sabbaths, on and on. Oh, yeah, I need you to tell me how to do this one. Oh, no. Thank you. I appreciate that, but we're not on that one yet. Why are we not on? Should be on? All right. This is like a little NASCAR thing that we have going on here. It's like, when the car pulls over to change the tires. That's what's happening right now. It's a pit stop. It's a pit stop. I just need someone else with like a water bottle just to drench me in the thing. And we'll be good to go. Thank you, dear. Appreciate that. All right, so we have these two kinds of Sabbaths. We have the weekly Sabbath, and then we have the festival Sabbath. Really? That's where you're going to stop? That's where you're going to stop? Right there? Oh, my goodness. Yeah, she's just enjoying herself here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Arwen is extra. I think we all knew that ahead of time when we saw her in a children's story, and literally every other time she's ever on camera. Arwen is just extra. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Anyways, I don't remember what we were talking about. I think we were in the Epistle of James or something. I think I was just wrapping up, wasn't I? Well, anyways, good time, everybody. Hope you have a great Sabbath. Oh, man. Anyways, that was a good time. So I think I was saying here we had the festival Sabbaths, and an example of that would be like the Day of Atonement, which says, on the 10th day of the 7th month, you must deny yourselves and not do any work, right? That means there's a Sabbath there on that day, whether native-born or foreigner, doesn't matter what your immigration status is in Israel, because on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. It is a day of what kind of rest? Right, of Sabbath rest. and you must deny yourself. So this is what I mean when I say that we have Sabbath days sprinkled throughout the festivals that the Hebrews celebrated. So the Day of Atonement was considered a Sabbath day. It's not the weekly Sabbath. It doesn't matter what day of the week this fell on. It could be a Tuesday, it could be a Thursday, it doesn't matter. That would be considered a special Sabbath because it's also the Day of Atonement. And you have a bunch of those guys. We'll get into those in just a little bit. But then we have a third type of Sabbath, which are the Sabbath years. As you can imagine, those happen every 7th year is a Sabbath year. And do you know what that means? That means, because you're all farmers, you don't have to go out and plant. Now, here's my $1 million question. What did they do all year? All right, we all have a to-do list that needs some attention, okay? And having a week off would be fantastic toward getting that done. Does anybody have a to-do list that lasts for a year? You know, like, what are you going to do? Like, just fix a picture frame in the house or something, maybe? But this was not a Sabbath for the people. This was a Sabbath predominantly for the land. It's to give the land a Sabbath from being farmed all the time. And this is really interesting because this solves an agricultural problem that they didn't know that they had, maybe at that point, which is why you need crop rotation. That's what we later did in order to kind of have different types of crops that take different nutrients out of the soil so you don't exhaust and wear down the soil till it turns into dust. Effectively, it has no nutrients. But that's what the Sabbath year was for, as well as some other things. And so it was to give the land a rest and to do a couple other things in Israelite society. But you have these 3 different types of Sabbaths that are all throughout the law. And so when people like Adventists or Seventh-day Baptists or whoever say we should keep the Sabbath, people naturally wonder which ones? All of them? None of them? Some of them? Which some of them? Right? What are we supposed to do with this? The Sabbath is everywhere, and it seems confusing. And as an Adventist, I've had this moment with God where I just thought, couldn't you just made this a little bit easier for us? You have the weekly Sabbath, Lord, if that's the one you wanted us to keep, and then the other Sabbaths, just call them something else. So there's no confusion. That would be really helpful, thank you. I don't know if you ever got that letter I wrote, but he heard me say it. He heard me do it. All right. So you have, you have this Sabbath type here, and the Sabbath year. It says, for 6 years sow your fields, for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather your crops. In the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest. So don't just take my word for it. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. Okay. Fair enough. I think, though, the problem is when we come to this with the question of which Sabbath should we be keeping, because it seems like the Sabbath is just so intertwined in the Mosaic covenant that if we're no longer bound by the Mosaic covenant as Christians, then all the Sabbaths go with it. I think we're missing the reason why God doesn't just call them something else. If God says you have a weekly Sabbath, and then you have festival Sabbaths, and then you have Sabbath years, and then every 49 years you have a Jubilee year, which is also like a super Sabbath year. The reason why he had a reason for infusing the Sabbath so deeply into the religious economy of the Hebrews. And I think when you just ask the question, when you come at it as a Christian, like, well, which one should I take and which ones do I leave? You're missing the whole point here, right? You're missing a broader purpose, a deeper lesson that God is trying to teach here. Maybe we start with a question like, why did God put the Sabbath everywhere in this covenant? Let's try to find his meaning for this and then at the end that might help us answer the question of which ones do we take and which ones do we leave, okay? So what we see here is the weekly Sabbath, the one that started that creation, it's a template for Israel's religious life. So basically, he takes this thing that he established at creation, and by the time he gets to the point of making a covenant with his people at Sinai, and ordering their lives when they get to the promised land, God takes that 7th-day Sabbath and he turns it into kind of like a measuring stick by which he uses to build their religious house that they're going to be living in. He uses it as a template and copies and pastes and stretches and does all sorts of other things. which is really interesting because, right, you have a Sabbath every 7 days, but when is the Sabbath year? Every 7 years. So what did he do? He just took the week and just stretched it to being, instead of 7 days, he makes it 7 years. He's taking that original template and he's just multiplying it until instead of 7 weeks, you get 7 years. And then when is the Jubilee year? Oh, it's 7 times those 7 Sabbath years, 7 Sabbath years, right? So 49. And then you have a year of Jubilee. And then you look at the days of the festivals. All right, you ready for this fun stuff? First up, anybody know the first festival on the Hebrew calendar? Passover. That is right. Well done. Passover is behind us at this point in the year. Passover is the first festival. The one that comes right after it, like connected right to it, right up against it, is we have unleavened bread, which they celebrate there. And by the way, so we'll just take them as one unit. During Passover and unleavened bread, there would be a special Sabbath at the beginning and at the end of that feast. Then you have, we're going to skip first fruits, but we'll talk about the Feast of Weeks had a special Sabbath. The Festival of Trumpets had a special Sabbath. The Day of Atonement, as we read, was a special Sabbath. The Festival of Tents, there would be another special Sabbath at the beginning and at the end. And I put first fruits aside because that one doesn't have a special Sabbath, but it takes place the day after a special Sabbath. So you'd have the special Sabbath and then you'd celebrate first fruits. So in other words, all of these festivals are connected in some way to one of these special Sabbaths. And that's what's really interesting. Like, God designed it so you would never be able to celebrate one of these feasts without it being connected in some way, shape, or form to a special Sabbath. The Sabbath was everywhere. It wasn't just like on one of these feasts there was a special Sabbath. And all of them, there was a special Sabbath somewhere next to it, on it, before it, after it, both, whatever. God put the Sabbath everywhere. And I think that's something that is worth paying attention to. When God was going to design their religion from scratch, He chose the Sabbath as a kind of template and infused their religion with the Sabbath. So not only would you have the weekly Sabbath as a part of your religious life, that'd be like the basic nucleus, that'd be the basic building block for your religious life, is you'd have that weekly Sabbath. You'd experience that every single week, 52 times a year or whatever. You'd have that then. But beyond that, you would also have the feasts. And every time you celebrated the feast or a festival, you'd have a special Sabbath. And then every 7 years, you'd have a special Sabbath year. And then every 49 years, once in your lifetime, maybe twice if you're lucky, you would have a Jubilee Sabbath. Right? So, I mean, like, what people don't understand is people look at the sanctuary and say, well, this was, or the temple, and this was the foundation of the religious life of the Israelites. But it wasn't the sanctuary, it was the Sabbath that was the basic building block, that was the center of the spiritual life of the Israelites. Because even someday when the temple is gone, you know what's still there? The Sabbath. And it's still here, even though there's no temple in Jerusalem. Right? The Sabbath became even more important for them because it was that basic building block that whether you have a building or you don't have a building, whether you have sacrifices or don't have sacrifices, you have the Sabbath. Wherever it is you are in the world, you have the Sabbath if you're a Jew. And so the Sabbath, not the sanctuary, is the core element of Hebrew religion. And it was designed to be that way from the very beginning. And we see this in interesting places elsewhere. If you go to 2 Chronicles here, Jeremiah talked about Israel going into captivity in Babylon for 70 years and coming out when the Persians are in power. Okay, interesting. And so the author of 2 Chronicles says, he carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came into power. And it says, the land enjoyed its what? Sabbath rest. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed. Now that's a really interesting thing. So this 70 years of exile, it's not just a number that got made up. It's not like 63 or 111 or whatever. That 70 is significant. And the author of 2 Chronicles is saying it was enough time, it lasted enough time so that the land could enjoy a Sabbath. The implication being is that the Israelites before the exile were not giving the land the Sabbath that it deserved. And so the author of 2 Chronicles sees the captivity as a judgment for justice for the land. Like, I'm going to carry these people away because these people are working the land to death and are not giving the land the Sabbath that I designed for it. So I'm going to get rid of these people so that the land can enjoy a Sabbath rest. Whew. We see the same thing, by the way, in Daniel chapter 9. There's that great prophecy, 70 weeks are determined for your people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is that? It's a cycle of 10 Sabbath years. That's what it is. Right, the 70 weeks. Of course, it's 490, when you add it all up. But it's divisible by the Sabbath year, and that's the point. That's the point. So you see this basic building block of 7, of 6 plus 1, as an interesting and integral part, not just of the way that Hebrew religion and worship was designed, but also in the subsequent judgment and stuff that happened later. Like their captivity in the Babylon, at least in 2 Chronicles, was described as necessary so that the Sabbath could be observed by the land that they were overworking. Okay, this is really, really, really interesting to me. God connects the Sabbath with all these festivals, almost as if they're like branches of a tree. If that's how you want to visualize it, you can think of the trunk as like, this is the 7-day Sabbath that was started at creation and all this sort of stuff. But then when he comes to like designing this religion, he finds ways to have the Sabbath grow out in different directions and to serve different purposes. And it connects with these feast days, okay? So you see here these, I'll just put them up, kind of bunching them together a little bit here by twos until the end. So Passover and unleavened bread both represent, just very loosely, redemption from death and trust in God's care for us, because that's a really big element with the Sabbath. If you're going to work for 6 years but you're not going to plant the 7th year, what in the world are you going to eat? You have to trust that God's going to provide for you. That's a scary thing when you live in a world where you just can't go to Walmart to get more food. Like, you're responsible for the food you grow. And if you can't just go get more, if you run out, if something bad happens, like your life literally depends on God following through with what he said he was going to do. Now, I learned a new thing from Teresa when we were last out at the Grow Garden. I didn't know this. I'm sure you all know this because many of you are better gardeners than I am. But this idea of volunteer plants that grow even when you didn't plant them. They from last year or whatever, they just pop up. We got squash that just came out of nowhere. I don't think we harvested a single squash last year. I don't even like squash. Don't ask me why we planted them. I don't even like squash, but we didn't even harvest one. But we've got them like coming up everywhere now, and it just drives me crazy. Like, of all the things we planted last year, this is what's coming up. We got a couple of tomatoes. Tomatoes are like, tomatoes and I understand each other. Like, they're inexpensive. They're easy to grow more of. They just come back all the time, in so many different places. You don't even know how they got there, but there's a tomato, and it's like, we understand each other. We're not hard, not a lot of high maintenance. You can get a bunch of different varieties of them. They're all fantastic. It's hard to screw up a tomato plant. And I appreciate tomatoes for that reason. It's not like, you get some and it's like potatoes and they're like, well, you got to watch out for whatever it is, the fungus or whatever it is that they can get, something like that. And, and it's just like, tomatoes, I'm like, we don't care. Here we go. It's a new year. Let's go, guys. And they're just up. They find a way out. I like tomatoes. Anyways, we have all these volunteer plants. So, is that what the Israelites were having to rely on, was the volunteer plants? They had planted all this last year, and they have to trust that God would cause enough to come up this year so that they would have something to eat. Man, it teaches faith, doesn't it? Every 7 years it teaches faith. Like, just like but see, you wouldn't have to get to that point on your own, because every single week you would have a day where you're not working to provide for yourself and for your family, trusting that God would take care of you. So if you can get through that baby step of the weekly Sabbath, if you can learn to trust God that if I take one day off, the universe isn't, we're like Atlas holding the world on our shoulders, and it's like, if I take a day off, is the world going to collapse around me? Is everything going to get messed up and stuff? And God's like, yeah, I got it. No worries, man. You'll be good. And so we learn, okay, God can handle things one day a week without my help. What an idea, what a concept. I can trust him. Well, now, what about can you do it every seventh year? Okay, well, that's a little harder, but he's helped me all these weeks up until this point. I certainly can trust him every seventh year. Right? Are you getting the idea of like how he's trying to teach people things with the Sabbath? He's trying to teach them how to trust in him, starting with the little baby steps, because that's what he does with all of us, isn't it? Little baby steps, and then to some bigger stuff every 7 years. Take a whole year off, not just a day. Whew, okay, God. You got this, though. You got this. And then it's every 7 of those Sabbath years, we got a huge year of Jubilee. And there's where we let the people who work for us go, too. And you think, oh, boy. Okay, we're just starting over. Every 49 years, we're switching property. We're going back to our original ancestral property. So if you had some bad fortune and somebody else, and you had to sell your land in order to make ends meet, every 49 years, it's like, hey, go get your land back. It's yours. You get something because, land was the basic unit of wealth. Land meant food. Land meant children. Land meant animals. Land meant all these other things that you needed in life to prosper as a human being. So every Jubilee, it's like, go get your land back. So if you had to sell it in order to survive, you get it back. It's like a huge reset button. It's fantastic. So you start over again, though. You get a second chance on the year of Jubilee. Every 7 years, I love this. This is what God says. There need be no poor people among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. Oh, okay. But it says, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted to them. And it goes on and on and on and talking about this in ways that makes me uncomfortable, of all the things that I need to do to make sure that they're taken care of. We see in the story of Ruth, of course, one of those ways was that you're not to be German when it comes to harvesting your field. Max efficiency. We're going to get it all in. Don't leave a single head of grain, the fall down. No, you were supposed to leave a little bit around the borders, around the edges, in case somebody needs some food. They can just come and get it. And they have the dignity of harvesting it themselves. Right? Maybe they want to come over at night. They don't want to be seen. But they can come over at night and they can take what they want. Harvest it themselves, go make it in the bread themselves, and have something to eat, right? But you just leave a little bit for others who may need it, and that's a beautiful thing. And so God's like, hey, your attitude toward people should be to be generous. And when it comes to the Sabbath year, every 7 years, and especially on the Jubilee year, you're supposed to forgive people's debts. Hello, Sally Mae. It's been 7 years. Right, you're supposed to forgive their debts. We're not supposed to charge interest at each other anyway, but even then, you forgive their debts. Every 49 years, you let the people go free if they had to sell their labor to you, to work for you in order to make ends meet. You let them go free. And you realize these Sabbath years, these years of Jubilee, and these festivals all have ways of adding meaning to the original Sabbath too. Because you realize, okay, you and I, we may not live in a society that celebrates Jubilee and Sabbath years and all those sort of things, but we can still, I think, when God connected the Sabbath to these festivals, when he connected the Sabbath to these Sabbath years and all these other things, it became ways in which new meaning could be added to the Sabbath through those branches. They come back to the trunk and you realize, okay, maybe we're not forgiving everyone's debts every seventh day. Maybe that's not what we're supposed to do, but I can at least learn from how God is telling people to celebrate the Sabbath years. I can learn from how God is connecting the Sabbath to these different festivals, and I can draw from them lessons that infuse my weekly Sabbath keeping today. Okay? So it's a day when we're supposed to be generous with one another. It's a day when we're supposed to make sure that those who need something have something in our midst. It's a day when we, as I put these feasts up there, right? Passover and unleavened bread was about redemption from death and God's care for us, like trusting that he'll provide for us. First fruits and Festival of Weeks were both celebrations of the harvest, of the first harvest, of the things that God has given us. Trumpets and Day of Atonement were a period where you humble yourself before God, you cleanse your soul, and while the high priest makes intercession for you. And Festival of Tabernacles was a celebration at the end of the harvest, after you have brought in all of the things that God has given you. That one also begins and ends with a special Sabbath. And you realize when you look through these feasts that they tell the spiritual story that all of us are on. It begins with us being under the blood of the Lamb and being saved from our Egypt. From being saved from our sin. And it ends with the harvest, with us celebrating all the abundance that God has given us. What is in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus says in one of his parables, the harvest represents the end of the age, doesn't it? And so when you go from the first feast to the seventh feast, is it a coincidence that there are 7 feasts? Is it a coincidence that the first feasts begin in the first month and the last feasts begin in the 7th month? No, there's not a coincidence at all. Like, you see the Sabbath even behind the scenes there. But as you begin with this Feast of Redemption at Passover, you end with this feast of celebration at the end of the age, as Jesus calls it. You realize that's all of our spiritual journeys through those feasts. Every single year, through these festivals, you're making a journey beginning with your salvation and ending with that moment at the end of the age when the harvest is ready and Jesus comes and brings it in, right? He returns. So every year you're going through that journey that all of us are on in our lives. And the Sabbath was connected to every single stop that you made from the first feast to the last feast. It was a part of that journey. And so I think if I'm celebrating Passover and there's a Sabbath, a special Sabbath connected to Passover, then yes, it's a day to remember our creation. It's a day to remember our redemption from Egypt. It's also a day to remember my own personal salvation and how God came into my life and set me free from sin, right? And maybe when I go on to first fruits, which later became associated with weeks and so on with Pentecost, is you're celebrating the first fruits of the Holy Spirit coming into our lives as well. Like, we have these later Christian accretions which get added to them as well. But we're finding as the Israelites went through this journey, you're finding they're celebrating this spiritual lives that they were on, this journey that they were on. And when Jesus came, I think he added even more meaning to that journey as well. But the Sabbath is connected to all of them, including the Day of Atonement. So maybe on that Sabbath, it's a somber Sabbath. It's a day when you say, am I right with God? Because we're nearing the end of the festivals. We're nearing the one where he returns and takes us all home forever. And that's the time where you stop and say, I just want to make sure I'm right with him. Do I have anything that needs to be confessed? Do I have anything that I've been harboring that I shouldn't have been harboring in my life? Any sort of regret or anger? Some kind of sin that I've cherished, right? I want to just give that to God right now because the end is almost here, right? And that's what Day of Atonement is about. So maybe that Sabbath feels a little bit different. That special Sabbath feels a little bit different than, say, the first fruits where it's more celebration, or the last one, which is more celebration. Right? Do you understand? Like, these Sabbaths became really special, and they took on different flavors depending on which feast was near. And I think we can do that too. Every Sabbath that we celebrate each week does not have to be the same. We can take a Sabbath and say, you know what? We may not be celebrating the Day of Atonement in all of its particulars, but this is a Sabbath we want to dedicate towards really just kind of digging deep in our own hearts and praying with each other. And you may have another Sabbath where it's like, this is a Sabbath for celebration. Something wrong may be going on in your life. We'll get to that prayer request next week. This Sabbath, we just want to hear praise. We just want to hear what's going good. You know what I mean? Like, why not? Because they had a Sabbath variety as they worshiped every single year. They had different kind of emphases and focuses as they worshiped with these Sabbaths all throughout the year. And I just wanted to bring all this up because I think sometimes we look at this, even Adventists, we look at these special Sabbaths and Sabbath years and all this stuff. We're like, yeah, that's all this old covenant stuff. It's meaningless to us as Christians now. It's like, okay, whether or not you celebrate it, it's still worth investigating the meaning that God designed for it to have. Does that make sense? it's still worth trying to understand, what was he trying to teach people by connecting the Sabbath with everything in their religious lives? What was the point there? And so, as we've said at the very beginning of this series, the Sabbath doesn't get less significant as time goes on. It gets more and more significant. It gets more and more important as time goes on. It's spreading. The branches of the tree are just spreading from these roots that were laid at creation in Genesis 2. They're just spreading, and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and broader and broader and broader. And the Sabbath is just becoming more and more integral to spiritual life. If you lived back then, you'd be keeping the Sabbath along with everyone else as well. So what do we find? How can all this help our Sabbath keeping? Let's end with that question. How can all of these different Sabbaths that we find in Moses' law help us with our own Sabbath keeping? Okay, well, if every Sabbath year we're supposed to forgive each other's debt, and Sally Mae forgives our debt. Thank you. There's an amen. All right. Let your people go. The Pharaoh over there. All right. Then it's a day for not holding these things. If somebody in church owes you money, this is not a day you remind them of that. And if you see them kind of avoiding you because they know they owe you money and it's kind of awkward, then make it a point to go to them and just say, hey, it's Sabbath. I don't care. Right? And that's the beautiful thing, because on the Sabbath, as it says in Exodus chapter 20, who gets the rest? It's you, it's your children, it's your animals, it's your guest. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean if somebody has a higher social position than you in life. On Sabbath, the world is flat. Oh, great. That's going to get taken out of context. Gosh. Yeah, oh man, oh, not that again. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, those are so many hours on YouTube you're never going to get back. But, all the social hierarchy of somebody being more important or having more power or having more something than somebody else, like on Sabbath, none of that matters because everybody rests. The Sabbath rest is not a privilege that belongs to a few who have made it somewhere. It is something that belongs to everybody, including your animals, including the land that you walk on. Everybody gets a Sabbath. So what does that mean when I keep my Sabbath? Okay, well, I don't farm. I'm not in danger of I've given the land a break my whole life. Except one little corner of my yard, which I leave alone a lot more than I should. What does that mean? It means that this is a day to extend Sabbath to everybody, that I'm not somebody more important than you are on Sabbath. In fact, on this day, of all days, we're all at the foot of the cross, man. We're all equal. We're all created in God's image. None of that other stuff matters. It also means, hey, extend it to creation. If you go out and this is a day I wouldn't necessarily work in my garden. And just let the land be. Let the bees have the flowers. Let the bugs do whatever it is they want to do. Just let them have a break too. Unless it's a black widow in my house. But so I want to extend that to creation. Look for people you can extend that rest to. It's why I don't go out and eat on Sabbath, because I want to give them a break. It's hard enough to be a server these days, right? But I want to extend rest to them and give them an opportunity to have a break, at least not for my sake. It's not a today for to-do list. It's not a day, if I'm not going to hold people's debts against them, I'm not going to hold grudges against them either. It's a moral debt that we sometimes accumulate. I'm going to set them free in my heart. I may not have servants and all those sort of things, but hey, Jubilee reminds me that Sabbath is a good time just to set people free in your heart. If you're angry at them, if they've done you wrong, just set them free in your heart. Just let them go. Just let them go. Right? So we can just go on and on and on. You can study these feasts. You can study all these things. But when you do that, do it with the perspective of, I want to learn more about the Sabbath that I keep. Help inform me, Lord, because you've taught all these lessons through the Sabbath throughout this law. Teach me more about the weekly Sabbath as I study that. That's what I think it is fundamentally for. And when you add all of this up, I think at the very least what you're going to find is Sabbath is about creation. It's about redemption. It's also about generosity. It's also about setting people free. It's also about forgiving debts. And it's also about restoring what was lost. And you think, why are we so eager to get rid of this day? This day is awesome. I mean, I wish I didn't have to wear a jacket, but I mean, it's awesome. I don't have to wear a jacket, but you know, Matt Rice makes me. All right. So I think that's just where I want to leave it today is if you're up for the adventure, spend some time reading through the Mosaic Covenant. If you want, get on the computer, just search for Sabbath during those 5 books of the Bible and focus on the uses outside of what you're used to. So, okay, leave Genesis 2 aside, leave Exodus 20 aside. Look for those uses. Like in Exodus 31, I believe, when it talks about the Sabbath will be a sign. It says it like 3 times in that chapter. Be a sign between you and me. It'll be a sign between you and me. It'll be a sign between you and me. So does that mean then that my weekly Sabbath is also a sign between God and I? It's like that thing we have. Like you have that song with somebody. It's like that's our song, or you know, that's our game, or that's our show, or that's our thing. You know, that thing you have with somebody. It's like God's like the Sabbath is that thing I have with you. So, you know, when other people see the Sabbath, they'll know that's that thing I have with you. That's our thing. Like, that's awesome. But I like the idea of that. So, like, look for how these other uses of Sabbath add meaning to the Sabbath that we observe. All right? That's your challenge. Next week, get this. We're going to cover the Sabbath through the rest of the Old Testament. I know. You've never seen someone move so fast. All right? God bless you guys. Let's pray. Father above, I just want to thank you again for this gift of Sabbath. We just keep rolling, whether the mic works or doesn't work, or my daughter sticks a balloon in my face. It's just, we find so much good news in the Sabbath. Now, it's not you. It's not a replacement for who you are, Father, by any stretch. But I think we love the Sabbath so much because it bears so much resemblance to you in everything that you represent for us. We find redemption in it and creation in it. We find a reminder to rest because we need it, because it's good for us as human beings. Like all of these good things that you intended for us and have done for us, we find reminders of all of that in the Sabbath. And that's why we celebrate it. We keep our eyes on you, Lord. Keep our focus on you. And we're thankful for you because of Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.